starting Genesis 25, and we will start with Julie and Fred, and we can read 5 verses each today.
Abraham married another wife whose name was Keturah. She gave birth to Zimran, Jokshan, Median, Ishbak, and Shua. Jokshan was the father of Sheba and Dedan. Dedan's descendants were the Asherites, Letushites, and Lemunites. Median's sons were Ephah, Epher, Hanok, Abida, and Eldah. These were all descendants of Abraham through Keturah. Abraham gave everything he owned to his son Isaac.
But before he died, he gave gifts to the sons of his concubines and sent them off to a land in the east, away from Isaac. Abraham lived for 175 years, and he died at the ripe old age, having lived a long and satisfying life. He breathed his last and joined his ancestors in death. His sons, Isaac and Ishmael, buried him in the cave of Machpelah near Muri, in the field of Ephron, son of Zorah the Hittite. That was the field Abraham had purchased from the Hittites and where he had buried his wife Sarah.
All right, the Olens, why don't you take the next 15 verses?
All right. And it came to pass after the death of Abraham that God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac dwelt at Beer Lahai Roi. Now this is the genealogy of Ishmael, Abraham's son, whom Hagar the Egyptian Sarah's maidservant bore to Abraham. And these were the names of the son of Ishmael by their names, according to their generations. The firstborn of Ishmael, Nebajoth, then Kedar, Adbeel, Mibsam, Mishma, Duma, Masa, Hadar, Tema, Jetur, Napish, and Kadima. Should have let Julia read those.
No, I did enough, thank you.
These were the sons of Ishmael, and they are the names of the 12 tribal rulers according to their settlements and camps. Ishmael lived 137 years. He breathed his last and died, and he was gathered to his people. His descendants settled in the area from Hilvah to Shur, near the eastern border of Egypt, as you go toward Asher. They lived in hostility towards all the other tribes related to them. This is the account of the family line of Abram's son Isaac. Abraham became the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel of Armenium of Padam Aram, the sister of Laban the Aramean.
Now Isaac pleaded with the Lord for his wife because she was barren, and the Lord granted his plea, and Rebekah his wife conceived. But the children struggled together within her, and she said, "If all is well, why am I like this?" So she went to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb, two people shall be separated from your body. One people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger." So when her days were fulfilled for her to give birth, indeed, there were twins in her womb. And the first came out red. He was like a hairy garment all over. So they called his name Esau.
All right, Sherry.
Then the other twin was born with his hand grasping Esau's heel. So they named him Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when the twins were born. As the boys grew up, Esau became a skillful hunter. He was an outdoorsman, but Jacob had a quiet temperament, preferring to stay at home. Isaac loved Esau because he enjoyed eating the wild game Esau brought home. But Rebekah loved Jacob. One day, when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau arrived home from the wilderness, exhausted and hungry. Esau said to Jacob, "I'm starved. Give me some of that red stew." This is how Esau got his other name, Edom, which means red.
All right. Welcome, Alan. So glad you can be with us tonight. We are currently in Genesis chapter 25. Sherry just finished verse 30, and Gladdy is about to read 31 to 34.
But Jacob said, "You must sell me your rights as the firstborn son." Esau said, "I am almost dead from hunger. If I die, all of my father's wealth will not help me." But Jacob said, "First promise me that you will give it to me." So Esau made a promise to Jacob and sold his part of their father's wealth to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and vegetable soup, and he ate and drank, and then left. So Esau showed how little he cared about his rights as the firstborn son.
All right. Anything stand out in this chapter?
It was sounding to me like it was tantamount to blackmail to get some food, to give up your rights as the firstborn.
Right?
So they're no better back then than they are today.
Yeah, there's definitely maybe manipulation. But obviously Esau could have said no. What's interesting is the reason he was manipulated into it was because he, as he says in verse 32, he really felt like he was dying of starvation. One of the things that's interesting is there are some people, I forgot now what it was called, because they did a study on this, where people actually felt like if they didn't get something, their lives would be in danger. And it could be as ridiculous as a car or a relationship. Maybe a relationship is, you can understand that a little bit better. But there are people who go shopping and they really feel like they really need this. And part of the study was with shopaholics who really felt like if they didn't get this dress or they didn't get whatever it is they're shopping for, something would happen that they would really lose out, and their lives, they feel like something inside of them would die. I don't think they would say that, yeah, I'm going to die tomorrow if I don't buy this dress. But they have this feeling of, if I don't get this, something bad is going to happen to me. And that is why they would actually shop for things that they can't afford. They would buy things that they would not need. And they would have shopper's remorse almost within the hour of what they bought it. And it seems to me that Esau had this same kind of feeling right now. He was so hungry that somehow he felt that if he didn't have this bowl of stew, that he would really die. And at first I thought it was just an exaggeration. And it could have been. It could be an exaggeration, but it seems to me that there are people who kind of go through that. And when people are these people are asked, well, why did you do what you did? Then sometimes their answer would be, well, I felt like if I didn't do this, I would really, really miss out. And it's an actual feeling of life is getting sucked out of them if they don't have this. And he was willing to give up something very important. Now, can anybody describe what a birthright is?
That's the, in Europe, like the UK, for example, I know, the oldest son gets it all.
Mhm.
And I've read on some families where the oldest son got it all and the young ones left. The second or third one down, they went to Africa or wherever to make their life because there was nothing at home for them.
Right,
It is a fact.
right.
I think in the Hebrew culture too, wasn't that they not only got the inheritance, but they also received the leadership role of the family. That meant not just leadership in making decisions, but also leading spiritually. And I think Esau did not really care about that. That wasn't, I think he was a guy that didn't want to be tied down to anything except to have fun, to hunt, to do the things he wanted to. So I'm not sure he was too thrilled about being tied down to having to lead out the family, especially spiritually. But Jacob was, I think, he had a deep interest in spiritual things and that side of things. So I think part of that birthright is the leadership role.
Right. And yeah, they do get to make all the decisions because they get everything. That's part of the birthright.
Mhm.
And at least at this point, he didn't care. But I know in the next chapter, he really did care. You know,
Mhm.
there's this moment of, oh, I thought we were just kidding kind of deal. um,
I think even now, like in a lot of course, I'm familiar mostly with Asian culture, but even in our Filipino culture, the firstborn usually gets, I feel, more responsibility either to care for our parents, and so probably in turn they might be responsible for, dispersing the estate or whatever. And so I think until modern times, there's still that, we don't call it birthright, but I know even in our families, there's some sort of expectation of,
Mhm.
if you are the oldest, then, you'd probably be asked to take over some decisions that, like, I'm the middle child, so I'll be like, okay, leave it to my sister. She's the oldest.
Mhm.
well, we begin to see some of that on the first part of the chapter, where Abraham actually just gave everything to Isaac and then just gave gifts to his concubine sons. So you begin to see that, Isaac got everything. Everybody else got a gift. And when you begin to see that Abraham had at least, 300 an army of about over 300, you begin to see how vast his wealth was. And I don't know how I would feel if, there'd be like 20 of you. I don't know if there's 20 sons, but let's just say let's just say there's 10. There's at least 10 sons and daughters. And, when he dies, y'all get gifts. And then Isaac just gets this humongous amount of stuff. I mean, how would you feel? But what's interesting for me is in that culture, what he did was actually very generous. And partly because the concubines are property, which means the sons of the concubines are also property. And so when he gave them gifts, he was basically telling those sons, look, you can actually go. Instead of saying, yeah, you have to serve my son, which he had every right to do. And that's why, Abraham had an army. That's why he had all these servants, is because any children that the servants would have was still his property. And so when Abraham decided, look, these are my concubines. I could just make them my property, or I can say, I mean, if you want to stay and become property, you could, but let me give you gifts so that you at least have an option. And I know in our culture, that doesn't seem to make sense, but being or reading the culture of slavery in America, where, you know, if you're a slave owner, you own that slave. That slave cannot do anything without your consent. And if they did anything without your consent, that's punishable by death. And if that happened, you know, even maybe 150 years ago in our country, I can't imagine what it was like during the time of Abraham. So even as we read this in the eyes of that culture, we begin to see that Abraham was a very generous person, that he really cared about his household. And the other thing is his wife Keturah. Now there are all kinds of what is that again? Interpretations on who Keturah is. Some of the interpretations are that Keturah was actually another wife that Abraham married, even when he was married to Sarah. And some interpretations actually say that Keturah is really Hagar, who Abraham married either after Sarah died or sometime before that. Now, we really don't know who Keturah was, but it seems to me that even Keturah, even the sons of Keturah, was treated the way the other concubines were treated. And it seems to me that, again, it's very clear that the text says that Isaac got everything. I don't know how much Ishmael got, but it was probably a little bit more than the rest of the others. And I don't know, I like the version that Keturah is really Hagar, but that has some problems because in verse 12, it actually mentions Hagar. So again, it's one of those things that you kind of have to guess one way or the other who Keturah was. But I understand that no matter what guesses people have, there'd be problems with it.
You know, I've often wondered why it says specifically in most versions that Abraham sent all of his sons, his children, by the others away to the east. Was he afraid there would be contentions like there was with Ishmael to Isaac, or was he trying to protect Isaac from dissension from these others?
That would be what some of the commentaries I read said. It was his way of protecting his son, knowing that he lived in a very cantankerous household after, you know, both Ishmael and Isaac were born in the same household, so to speak. And it seems to me that sibling rivalry after the parents died was a real thing back then.
Yeah.
You know, and if the firstborn gets everything and then everybody else gets less than, you know, I don't know, nothing or just a little bit, or, you know, just a little bit of the property or just a little bit of the riches, then I can understand how kids can really get jealous and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. But I like the picture of Ishmael and Isaac getting together to bury their dad.
Yeah.
You know,
And again, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say, you know, the picture that we've read earlier, that Abraham really did love Ishmael, and I'm sure it tore his heart apart to make him leave, you know, before with Hagar. That had to really tear him apart. So it is kind of tender to see here Ishmael, you know, partnering with Isaac to bury him.
Right. And again, this seems to come out in Abraham's story. He was well respected even by his enemies.
Mm-hmm.
That no matter what mistakes he did, he seemed to have gone out of his way to at least make amends for the mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a lesson for all of us. Obviously, none of us are perfect, but to actually admit your mistakes and then make amends for it instead of just ignoring it or saying, you know what, you know, whatever happens, happens, so to speak, shows you how Abraham matured as a follower of God. The thing I would like to summarize this whole lesson in is we've already in our lesson study, we know that God actually introduced himself to Joseph and to Pharaoh as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And throughout the Bible, we actually see God introducing himself as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And I don't know if you remember, but I've said before that the reason why God introduced himself as the God of Isaac, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob instead of Enoch, Moses, and Gideon is because we feel, and I mean, some theologians feel that the reason why God did that is, first of all, Abraham was the first person that he made the covenant about being a blessing to everyone. And second, those three had barren wives. It seems to me that God wanted to prove to the world that the nation he was making wasn't even made by humans, that God was right in there, that somehow birth by God or birth by the Holy Spirit has been happening before Jesus, that barren women, and it seems to me that you know, when we look at Jacob's wife, the one who was barren was not Leah, but Leah wasn't supposed to be his wife. He got tricked into Leah. But it seems to be with these three women, God was saying, I'm in charge of my plan for salvation for mankind. And the other thing about Esau is it could have been possible that if Esau was just faithful, if Esau did not sell his birthright, that God would have introduced himself as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Esau. And for me, I think that sobers me up to realize that every time we give something up that God has called us to do, we really don't know how big it is that we're giving up. If Esau ever makes it to heaven, I think there's just going to be this time where he's like, man, I'll live it for a bowl of stew. You know, I gave up the history of eternal history of what God has really planned for me for a bowl of stew. And many times I think we give God up for some things that are even less. And sometimes we have to actually give up something that's more than a bowl of stew. But I do think that this story tells us that anytime we give God up for something, whatever it is that the world offers, and Jesus makes it pretty clear that what good would it do if you gained the whole world? If somehow it was possible that you had the whole world and God says, can you please give up the whole world for me? What good would it do if you gained all the whole world and lose your own soul? It's a rhetorical question of how much could you possibly have lost if that's what you gave up? And I think God challenges us to say, I will ask you to give up something. I will ask you to struggle for something for me. But whatever it is you give up is nothing compared to what you gain when you have me. And for me, I hope that that's something that we keep in mind, because all of us will struggle with that question, because all of us get tested that way. How much are you willing to give up for God? Questions or comments? All right, I'm going to stop the recording. Thank you for joining us at our prayer and Bible study session as we journey through the Bible one chapter at a time. We realize that you might have some questions or comments on the things that we discussed today. And if you do, please feel free to fill out the form below. Also, if you would like to have your own Bible, please fill out the form below and we will get back to you as soon as we possibly can. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope to see you next time at our prayer and Bible study session.